She knew everything about him before they ever met. His secrets, his pain, even his dreams. But the truth behind her glowing eyes would change both their lives forever. David was having one of those evenings where nothing felt right. The rain was hitting his window in that annoying way that made everything feel even more depressing. He'd been sitting on his couch for the past 2 hours, just scrolling through his phone without really looking at anything. His apartment felt too quiet, too empty, like the walls were closing in on him bit by bit. It had been 3 weeks since his girlfriend walked out. She didn't even give him a proper reason, just said she needed space and left half her stuff behind. He kept meaning to box it up and call her, but every time he looked at her things, he just felt this heavy weight in his chest and decided to deal with it later. Work was going nowhere. Same desk, same computer, same boring reports day after day. His friends had stopped calling because he kept making excuses not to hang out. His mom was sick back home, but he hadn't visited in months because he kept telling himself he was too busy. Truth was, he just didn't have the energy for anything anymore. The weird thing was the dreams. For the past month, he'd been having these strange dreams about a woman he'd never met. She had these intense eyes that seemed to look right through him, like she could see every mistake he'd ever made, every lie he'd ever told himself. In the dreams, she never spoke. She just stood there watching him with this knowing look that made him feel exposed and vulnerable. He shook his head and got up to make some tea. That's when he heard the knock. Not a normal knock either. It was soft but urgent, like whoever was out there needed help but didn't want to make too much noise. David froze for a second because nobody ever came to his door this late. His neighbors barely knew he existed. When he opened the door, his heart actually skipped a beat. Standing there in the dimly lit hallway was the woman from his dreams. Not someone who looked like her. The exact same woman, same dark hair dripping with rain, same sharp features, and those eyes. Those impossible eyes that seemed to catch the light in a way that made them almost glow. She was soaked through, her jacket clinging to her shoulders, water pooling at her feet. But she didn't look uncomfortable. She looked calm, almost like she'd planned to get caught in the rain. When she smiled at him, it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who knew a secret. "Hi," she said, her voice smooth and clear. "I'm Elena. I just moved into apartment 7B down the hall. My key isn't working and I really need to call my landlord. Could I possibly use your phone?" David stood there like an idiot, trying to process what was happening. This couldn't be real. People don't just dream about strangers and then meet them the next week. That's not how life works. But here she was, standing in his doorway. Asking to use his phone like this was the most normal thing in the world. Yeah, sure, come in," he finally managed to say, stepping aside. Elena walked into his apartment, and that's when things got even stranger. She moved like she already knew the layout. She didn't look around curiously like a normal person would when entering someone's home for the first time. She just walked straight to his living room and glanced at his couch, his bookshelf, his TV, like she was checking to make sure everything was where it should be. "Nice place," she said. But there was something odd about the way she said it, like she was confirming something rather than complimenting him. David grabbed his phone from the coffee table and handed it to her. She took it, their fingers touching briefly, and he felt this strange electric jolt. She didn't seem to notice. She dialed a number and walked toward his window while she waited for someone to pick up. While she talked to whoever was on the other end, David couldn't stop staring at her. Every single detail matched his dreams. The way she tilted her head slightly when she listened. The way she touched her neck with her free hand. Even the small scar above her left eyebrow that he'd somehow known would be there. "Thanks," she said, ending the call and handing back his phone. "The landlord will be here in about 30 minutes. I really appreciate this." "No problem," David said, but his voice came out shaky. "So you just moved in?" "Just today," she replied, looking directly into his eyes. "It's funny how things work out sometimes. I almost took a different apartment across town, but something told me this was where I needed to be." The way she said it made David's skin prickle. There was meaning behind those words, layers he couldn't quite understand but could definitely feel. "Have we met before?" he asked, unable to stop himself. "You look really familiar." Elena's smile widened just a fraction. "I don't think so. But you know how it is. Sometimes people just have that kind of face. Or maybe you've seen me around the neighborhood." She started walking slowly around his living room, looking at his things. She paused at his bookshelf. running her finger along the spines of his books. "You like mystery novels," she observed. "And psychology books. Interesting combination." "Yeah, I guess," David said, feeling increasingly uncomfortable. How did this casual observation feel like she was reading his entire personality? She picked up a framed photo from his shelf. It was an old picture of him and his dad from when he was maybe 7 years old, at some beach. He kept it there even though he hadn't spoken to his father in almost 20 years. He didn't even know why he kept it. "Beautiful photo," Elena said softly. "You have his eyes." David felt his chest tighten. "You can't really see his eyes in that photo. It's too faded." Elena carefully put the frame back, turning to look at him with those glowing eyes. "You're right. I guess I just assumed. You look like someone who takes after their father." The conversation felt wrong. Every word felt loaded with something he couldn't identify. Before he could say anything else, Elena glanced at her watch. "I should probably wait downstairs for the landlord," she said, moving toward the door. "Thanks again for letting me use your phone, David." He froze. He hadn't told her his name. "How did you know my name?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Elena paused at the door, her hand on the handle. She looked back at him with an expression that was hard to read. "It's on your mail," she said, nodding toward the small table by the door where he'd tossed today's letters. Right there on top, David looked. Sure enough, there was an envelope with his name visible, but he could have sworn it hadn't been sitting that way when he came in. He'd tossed it face down, hadn't he? "Right," he said, feeling foolish. "Of course." Elena opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Just before leaving, she turned back one more time. "We'll be seeing a lot of each other, David. I have a feeling about these things." Then she was gone, leaving only wet footprints on his floor and 1,000 questions in his mind. David closed the door and leaned against it, his heart pounding. He walked to his window and looked down at the street. 5 minutes later, he saw Elena exit the building. But instead of waiting for the landlord like she'd said, she walked calmly down the street and disappeared around the corner. No landlord ever showed up. David checked with the building manager the next day. Apartment 7B had been empty for 3 months and no new tenant had signed a lease. The next morning, David woke up convinced he'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe he'd fallen asleep on the couch and dreamed it all. But when he went to his living room, there were still those wet footprints on his floor, now dried into faint marks on the wood. She'd been real. Elena had been real. He couldn't focus at work. His boss asked him twice if he was feeling okay. David just nodded and pretended to work on his reports, but his mind was spinning. Who was this woman? Why had she lied about the apartment? And how had he been dreaming about her before they met? He left work early, claiming a headache, and went straight to his building manager's office. Mr. Chen, a tired-looking man in his 60s, confirmed what David already knew. No new tenant in 7B. No one named Elena had even inquired about apartments in the building. "Why do you ask?" Mr. Chen said, looking at David with concern. "Did someone try to get into your apartment?" "No, nothing like that," David replied quickly. He didn't want to sound crazy. "Just thought I saw someone I knew. Must have been mistaken." But he wasn't mistaken. He knew what he'd seen. That night, David couldn't sleep. He kept getting up and looking out his window, half expecting to see Elena standing on the street below, staring up at him. The next day, everything got stranger. David stopped at his usual coffee shop on the way to work, the same place he went every single morning. He ordered his regular coffee and turned to find a seat. That's when he saw her. Elena was sitting in the corner booth reading a book, a cup of tea steaming in front of her. His first instinct was to leave, but something made him stay. He walked over to her table. She looked up and smiled like she'd been expecting him. "David," she said warmly. "What a nice surprise. Please sit down." "This isn't a surprise," David said, staying standing. "You knew I'd be here, did I?" Elena closed her book and looked at him with those intense eyes. "I just like this coffee shop. Good atmosphere. And they make excellent tea. You said you were waiting for your landlord last night. But you left, and there is no apartment 7B tenant. So who are you, really?" Elena's expression didn't change. "Sit down, David, you're making a scene." He looked around. A few people were glancing their way. Reluctantly, he sat down across from her. "I think maybe you misunderstood," Elena said calmly. "I was looking at apartments in this building, but I haven't signed anything yet. The landlord was supposed to meet me to discuss terms. When he didn't show up, I left. Simple as that. It sounded reasonable. But David knew she was lying. He could feel it. In the coffee shop, he pressed. Coincidence, she said with a shrug. This city isn't that big. People run into each other all the time. David wanted to argue, but what could he say? He couldn't prove anything. Maybe he was being paranoid. Maybe his lonely, depressed brain was making connections that weren't there. He left the coffee shop without finishing his coffee. But the encounters didn't stop. That afternoon, he went to the grocery store. Elena was there, standing in the cereal aisle, studying boxes like it was the most important decision of her life. She saw him and waved casually. We really need to stop meeting like this, she joked. David didn't respond. He grabbed what he needed and left quickly. His hands were shaking as he loaded groceries into his car. This couldn't be coincidence. She was following him, but why? The weekend came and David decided to change his routine completely. Instead of his usual morning jog in the park near his apartment, he drove 20 minutes across town to a different park he'd never been to before. He arrived just after sunrise, relieved to be somewhere she couldn't possibly predict. He started jogging on the trail, feeling like he could finally breathe again. Maybe he'd overreacted. Maybe she really did just frequent the same places he did. City life was like that sometimes. He rounded a bend in the trail and his breath caught in his throat. Elena was sitting on a bench about 50 feet ahead, wearing running clothes, drinking from a water bottle. She wasn't looking at him. She was staring straight ahead, peaceful and calm like she'd been sitting there for hours. David stopped running. His legs felt weak. This wasn't possible. There was no way she could have known he'd come to this specific park, at this specific time, on this specific trail. He'd barely decided himself until this morning. He turned around and started walking quickly back to his car. Behind him, he heard footsteps. Elena was following him. David, wait, she called out. He walked faster. David, please. I know this seems strange. He stopped and spun around to face her. Strange? This is beyond strange. How are you doing this? Are you following me? Do you have some kind of tracker on my car or something? Elena held up her hands in a gesture of peace. I know how this looks, but I promise you, I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not trying to scare you. Then what are you trying to do? David demanded. His voice was louder than he intended. An elderly couple jogging past gave them a concerned look. Elena glanced around, then stepped closer, lowering her voice. I know things, David, things about you. And I know that sounds creepy, but I need you to trust me. Your life is about to change, and I'm here to help you through it. Know things? What things? His heart was pounding now, fear mixing with anger. I know your mother is sick, Elena said softly. Cancer, stage 3. She hasn't told you how bad it really is because she doesn't want you to worry. I know you haven't visited her because you're afraid of what you'll find when you get there. David felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. How do you know that? Did you talk to my mother? Did you hack my phone or something? I know you wake up at 3 in the morning most nights, Elena continued, ignoring his questions. I know you sit in the dark and wonder if your life will ever mean anything. I know you haven't told anyone about the dreams you've been having. Dreams about someone who looks exactly like me. David's blood ran cold. The dreams. He hadn't told anyone about those. He'd barely admitted them to himself. Who are you? He whispered. Someone who understands you better than you understand yourself, Elena said. And I know that's terrifying. But David, I'm not your enemy. In fact, I might be the only real friend you have right now. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. She held it out to him. When you're ready to know the truth, call this number. But I'll warn you now. Once you know, there's no going back. Your life will never be the same. David took the card with trembling hands. It was plain white with just a phone number printed on it. No name, no company, nothing else. When he looked up, Elena was already walking away. He watched her disappear down the trail, and for the first time since this all started, he felt truly afraid. Not of her exactly, but of what she represented. She knew things she shouldn't know. She appeared places she shouldn't be. And somehow, impossibly, she was the woman from his dreams. That night, David sat in his apartment staring at the card. He should call the police. This was stalking, wasn't it? But what would he tell them? That a woman kept running into him in public places and knew personal information? They'd probably think he was paranoid or making it up. He looked at the card again. His hand moved toward his phone, then stopped. Did he really want to know? Elena said his life would never be the same once he knew the truth. Maybe some truths were better left buried, but deep down he knew he'd call, because the not knowing was worse than any truth could be. Whatever Elena wanted, whatever she knew, he needed to understand. Even if it destroyed everything he thought he knew about his life. He picked up his phone. But before he could dial, a text message came through from an unknown number. It said, "Not yet, David. You're not ready yet. Soon." David dropped his phone like it had burned him. She was in his head. Somehow Elena was in his head and he had no idea how to make it stop. 3 days passed and David didn't call the number. He told himself he was being smart, cautious. But really he was terrified. He started looking over his shoulder everywhere he went. Every woman with dark hair made his heart jump. Every unexpected sound made him flinch. He did call his mother, though. That conversation broke something in him. Elena had been right. The cancer was worse than his mom had let on. Much worse. The doctors were talking about months now, not years. His mom cried on the phone, apologizing for not telling him sooner. David cried too, alone in his apartment, feeling like the worst son in the world. On the 4th day, David decided enough was enough. He needed answers, and he needed them now. He grabbed the card and dialed the number before he could talk himself out of it. Elena answered on the first ring. "I'm glad you called. Where are you?" David demanded. "Same place I've been for the past 3 days," she replied calmly. "Apartment 7B. That apartment is empty." "I checked. Did you check the door?" Elena asked. "Or did you just take someone's word for it?" David felt stupid. He'd talked to Mr. Chen but never actually tried the door himself. "I'm coming there right now." "I'll be waiting," Elena said and hung up. David practically ran down the hallway to apartment 7B. His hand was shaking as he reached for the doorknob. He half expected it to be locked, for this to be another mind game. But the door opened easily. The apartment was dim, lit only by the afternoon sun coming through half-closed blinds. And there, covering one entire wall, were photographs, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all of David. He stepped inside slowly, his mouth dry. There were pictures of him as a child, pictures from his high school graduation, pictures from college, recent pictures of him at the coffee shop, at the park, walking to work. Every stage of his life was documented on this wall like some kind of shrine. Elena was sitting in a chair in the center of the room, watching him process what he was seeing. "What is this?" David's voice came out as barely a whisper. "What are you?" "I'm not what you think," Elena said quietly. "I'm not some stalker or crazy person. I'm a private investigator, David. I was hired to find you, to watch you, to understand who you've become." "Hired? By who?" Elena stood up and walked to a desk in the corner. She picked up a manila folder and held it out to him. "By your father." David's whole body went rigid. "My father? I haven't seen my father since I was 8 years old. He abandoned us. Why would he suddenly care about me now?" "Because he's dying," Elena said simply. "And he wants to see you before he goes. But he didn't know if you'd even talk to him. So he hired me to find out what kind of man you'd become, to see if there was any chance you might give him the opportunity to explain." "To apologize." David took the folder with numb hands. Inside were documents. Medical records showing his father had terminal liver disease. Letters his father had written over the years but never sent. And a plane ticket to Boston with David's name on it, dated for next week. "He's been following your life from a distance," Elena continued. "He knows about your mother's cancer. He knows you've been struggling. He wanted to reach out so many times, but he was afraid. Afraid you'd hate him. Afraid you'd tell him to get lost. So he hired me to be his eyes, to tell him if there was any hope." David's hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped the folder. "So you've been spying on me? Learning everything about me? Invading my privacy like it's nothing?" "Yes," Elena admitted. "And I'm not proud of it. But that's my job. I find people. I watch them. I learn their patterns, their habits, their secrets. I give my clients the information they pay for." "The dreams," David said suddenly. "How did you know about the dreams?" "I never told anyone. I never wrote them down." "How could you possibly know?" Elena's expression shifted, becoming something softer, more vulnerable. "Because I had the same dreams," she said quietly. "About you. For the past month, I've been dreaming about a man I was investigating, which has never happened to me before. I'd see you in my sleep and you'd be looking at me like you knew me, like we had some kind of connection. I thought I was losing my mind." David stared at her. That's impossible. I know it's impossible, Elena said, her voice rising with frustration. I know it doesn't make sense, but it happened. And when I knocked on your door that first night, I saw the recognition in your eyes. You'd been dreaming about me too. I could see it. She walked closer to him, and David could see she was actually scared. Not of him, but of what all this meant. I've been doing this job for 6 years, Elena continued. I've investigated hundreds of people. I've learned to keep my distance, to stay objective, to never let it get personal. But with you, something went wrong. The more I learned about your life, the more I felt like I understood you, like we were the same somehow. Both alone, both avoiding the things that hurt too much to face. So what? You thought you'd manipulate me? Make me think you were my dream woman so I'd do what you wanted? No, Elena said firmly. I thought I'd be honest with you. That's why I kept showing up places you'd be. I wanted you to notice me, to question what was happening, to eventually come looking for answers. Because the alternative was worse. What alternative? Your father only has a few weeks left, Elena said. Maybe less. If I'd done my job the normal way, writing up a report and handing it over, you might never have known until it was too late. I thought if I could make you curious enough, scared enough, you might actually listen when I finally told you the truth. David looked back at the wall of photographs, his entire life spread out like a timeline. You could have just talked to me, like a normal person. Instead of all this cloak and dagger stuff. Would you have believed me? Elena challenged. If a stranger walked up to you and said your father wants to see you after 20 years, would you have listened? Or would you have told me to leave you alone? David didn't answer because he knew she was right. He would have shut her down immediately. What did you tell him? David asked. My father. What did you tell him about me? Elena hesitated. I told him you're lost, that you're avoiding the people who love you, because you're afraid of losing them, that you're stuck in a life that doesn't make you happy because at least it's predictable and safe. I told him you're exactly like he was at your age, right before he made the biggest mistake of his life and left his family. David felt tears burning in his eyes. You don't know me. I know you better than almost anyone, Elena said softly. That's the problem. I've watched you for weeks. I've seen you at your worst moments when you thought no one was looking. I've seen you cry alone in your apartment. I've seen you stand at your mother's contact on your phone for 10 minutes before finally calling her. I know you, David. Maybe better than you know yourself. Then you know I should hate you, David said. You violated my privacy. You manipulated me. You made me feel crazy. I know, Elena said. And I'm sorry. I crossed lines I shouldn't have crossed. I got obsessed with this case with you in a way I never have before. If you want to report me, I understand. But first, I'm asking you to consider the trip to Boston. Your father made mistakes, terrible ones, but he's trying to make amends before he dies. You don't have to forgive him. You don't even have to like him. But maybe you owe it to yourself to hear what he has to say. David looked at the plane ticket in his hand. Boston, next Tuesday. A 2-hour flight to face the man who destroyed his childhood. Will you come with me? He asked suddenly, surprising himself. Elena blinked. What? If I do this, David said, if I go see him, I don't want to do it alone. You seem to know everything about my life anyway. You might as well see how this part ends. Elena studied his face for a long moment. Are you sure? No, David admitted. I'm not sure about anything anymore. But I'm asking anyway. Elena nodded slowly. Okay, I'll come with you. But David, I need you to understand something. After this is done, after you see your father, I'm leaving. I'm quitting this job. I can't do it anymore. This case broke something in me, made me realize I've been hiding from my own pain by diving into other people's lives. Your sister, David said, remembering what Elena had mentioned earlier. You became an investigator to find your sister. Elena's eyes widened slightly. How did you know that? You're not the only one who pays attention, David said. You mentioned it once that first night. You said you understood what it was like to search for someone. For the first time, Elena smiled. Really smiled. Maybe you do know me a little bit too. They stood there in that strange apartment filled with photographs, two damaged people who'd found each other in the most unusual way possible. Neither of them knew what would happen next, but for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt quite so alone. Tuesday then, David said. Boston. Boston, Elena agreed. As David left the apartment, he looked back one more time at the wall of photographs. His life seen through someone else's eyes. It was disturbing and invasive, but also strangely beautiful. Someone had cared enough to really see him. Even if the reasons had started out all wrong, maybe that was enough. Maybe that was a place to start. The days leading up to the Boston trip felt strange and suspended. Like David was living in a dream he couldn't quite wake up from. He kept going to work, kept going through the motions, but his mind was already somewhere else. He'd look up from his desk and realize an hour had passed without him remembering a single thing he'd done. Elena called him twice. The first time to confirm flight details. The second time just to check if he was okay. That second call lasted almost 2 hours. They talked about random things at first. Favorite movies. Childhood memories. The best pizza places in the city. But eventually the conversation turned deeper. "My sister's name was Christina," Elena said quietly. "She disappeared when I was 19. She was 16. One day she was just gone. No note, no explanation, nothing. My parents fell apart. My dad started drinking. My mom stopped sleeping, and I became obsessed with finding her. Did you ever find any leads?" David asked. "Dozens," Elena replied. "Most of them went nowhere. Every few months I'd get my hopes up, thinking this time I'd found her. But it was always a dead end. Eventually my parents gave up. They had a funeral for her without a body. They moved on, or at least they tried to, but I couldn't let it go. So you became a private investigator. I figured if I couldn't find my own sister, maybe I could help other people find their missing loved ones. Give them the closure I never got. For a while it helped. Made me feel like the searching meant something. But after a few years I realized I was just avoiding my own grief by drowning in everyone else's problems." David understood that better than he wanted to admit. "Is that why you took my father's case? Because it reminded you of your own family?" Elena was quiet for a moment. "Maybe. Or maybe I just needed the money. Rent doesn't pay itself. But yeah, there was something about the case that felt personal. A father trying to reconnect with a son he'd abandoned. A son who'd spent his whole life avoiding that pain. It felt familiar. "Do you ever wonder if you'll see her again?" David asked. "Your sister?" "Every day," Elena said. "Sometimes I imagine she's out there somewhere living a completely different life. Maybe she has a new name, a new family, a fresh start. Maybe she's happy. Maybe she doesn't want to be found. And maybe that has to be okay." They talked until David's phone battery was almost dead. When they finally hung up, David felt something shifting inside him. Elena wasn't just the mysterious woman who'd invaded his privacy. She was someone who understood loss and regret in a way most people didn't. She was someone who'd made mistakes while trying to outrun her pain. Just like him. Tuesday morning arrived too quickly. David packed a small bag, called his boss to say he was taking a few personal days, and met Elena at the airport. She looked different somehow. More relaxed. Less like she was on a mission and more like she was just another person catching a flight. They didn't talk much on the plane. David stared out the window, watching the clouds pass below, thinking about what he'd say to his father. Elena read a book, occasionally glancing at him with concern. "You don't have to do this," she said at one point. "We can turn around when we land, go home. Pretend none of this happened." "No," David said. "I need to do this. I need to know why. Why he left. Why he stayed gone. Why he waited until he was dying to reach out." The hospital in Boston was one of those old brick buildings that tried to look cheerful but just felt sad. They found his father's room on the 3rd floor. David stood outside the door for a full 5 minutes, his hand hovering over the handle, unable to make himself go in. Elena touched his arm gently. "I'll be right here. Take your time." David finally pushed open the door. The man in the bed looked nothing like the father he remembered. That father had been tall and strong, with thick dark hair and a loud laugh. This man was thin and frail, his skin almost gray, hooked up to machines that beeped and hummed. But when he opened his eyes and saw David, the recognition was instant. "David," his father whispered. "You came." David stood frozen in the doorway. 20 years of anger, hurt, and unanswered questions caught in his throat. All he could do was nod. "Please," his father said, gesturing weakly to a chair by the bed. "Sit. I know I don't deserve it, but please give me a chance to explain." David sat down stiffly. Behind him, Elena quietly closed the door, giving them privacy but staying just outside in case he needed her. "I've imagined this conversation 1,000 times," his father began, his voice rough and tired. "But now that you're here, I don't know where to start." "Why did you leave?" David asked. The question he'd been carrying for 2 decades finally out in the open. His father closed his eyes and David saw tears leak from the corners. "I was drowning," he said. "I had this family, this life that was supposed to make me happy. But I felt trapped. Your mother and I fought constantly. Money was tight. I was working 2 jobs and still couldn't pay the bills. I started drinking to cope with the stress. And the more I drank, the worse everything got." "So you just left," David said, his voice hard. "You walked away from your wife and your son because things were difficult." "I convinced myself you'd be better off without me," his father continued. "I was destroying everything I touched. I thought if I left, you and your mother could start over. Make a better life. Find some happiness. I thought I was doing the right thing." "You were wrong," David said flatly. "Mom worked 3 jobs after you left. We lost our house. We lived in a tiny apartment where I could hear her crying through the walls at night. I grew up thinking there was something wrong with me, that I wasn't good enough to make you stay." His father sobbed openly now. I know I destroyed you both, and I've hated myself every day since. I wanted to come back so many times, to fix it, to apologize. But the longer I stayed away, the harder it got. How do you ask forgiveness for something unforgivable? How do you walk back into your son's life after abandoning him? You don't," David said. "You don't get to walk back in and fix everything. You don't get to die and leave me with peace and closure. You made your choice 20 years ago. You don't get to unmake it now." "You're right," his father agreed. "I don't get to fix anything, but I needed you to know the truth. I didn't leave because I didn't love you. I left because I was broken and stupid and selfish. And losing you was the worst punishment I could have given myself. Every birthday, every Christmas, every milestone in your life that I missed, it tore me apart. But I thought I deserved that pain. I thought suffering alone was my penance." David felt his own tears starting. "You should have called. You should have written. You should have tried." "I should have done a lot of things," his father said. "But I can't change the past. All I can do is tell you I'm sorry, and that I've loved you every single day, even from a distance. You became a good man, David, better than I ever was, and I'm proud of you even though I have no right to be." They sat in silence for a while, both crying, both carrying grief that was too heavy to put into words. Eventually David reached out and took his father's hand. It was thin and cold, but it was still his father's hand. "I don't forgive you," David said honestly. "I don't know if I ever will. But I'm glad I came. I'm glad I got to hear the truth even if it doesn't make anything better." "That's more than I deserve," his father whispered. "Thank you for giving me this." They talked for another hour. His father told stories about David's childhood, memories David had forgotten or never knew. Small moments that his father had carried with him all these years. A time David fell off his bike and refused to cry. The way David used to line up all his toy cars in perfect rows. The last breakfast they'd had together before everything fell apart. "Your mother," his father said eventually. "How is she?" David hesitated. "She's sick,"